doing anything about addressing the actual root causes of misogyny, where 2/3 of mass shootings are connected to domestic violence, or the emergence of white supremacy radicalization, mass incarceration, and poverty, and the connections between that and mass shootings in our communities. I yield my time. Thank you.
We had guns everywhere. There was virtually no regulation. Any child in the 50s could buy a weapon from any seller if daddy sent them with the money. We didn't have mass shootings. It wasn't until 1968 in America that serial numbers were even required on weapons sold in this country. You order weapons through the Sears catalog by the mail. In the 70s, I attended a high school, large rural school. Virtually every vehicle in the parking lot was a pickup truck, and almost every one had a rifle or a shotgun on the back glass and a pistol under the seat. We didn't have school shootings.
This wasn't polite. It wasn't soft. It was Congressman Clay Higgins locking eyes with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and essentially saying, that explanation doesn't hold up. AOC pointed to the so-called iron pipeline, arguing that guns flowing in from states with looser laws fuel crime in cities like New York. Higgins didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He countered with history, culture, and one blunt question that cut through the noise. What actually changed in this country? You could feel the tension in the room. This wasn't a friendly policy exchange. It was a collision of worldviews, law versus culture, regulation versus responsibility. And if you're tired of watching the Second Amendment treated like it's negotiable, stick around. We're breaking this down piece by piece.
Discussion about New York City. There is no discussion about gun violence in New York City without discussing the iron pipeline that is Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, Pennsylvania, and honorary mention to Ohio, where 70% of likely illegal trafficked guns found in New York City come from. There's no discussion about gun violence in Chicago without talking about Indiana. Because the violence and the mothers that we have to comfort are losing children due to the guns and the carnage and the lawlessness unleashed by those states. I move on. For context, the NRA spent about $250 million in 2020 alone. That's more than twice the entire salary of Congress combined. In 1 year, lobbying against gun safety laws. There's also this discussion about anything but a gun, but that these are about violent people, but yet we aren't doing anything about addressing the actual root causes of misogyny, where 2/3 of mass shootings are connected to domestic violence, or the emergence of white supremacy radicalization, mass incarceration, and poverty, and the connections between that and mass shootings in our communities. I yield my time. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I'm gonna bring us back in time to World War II. America's population, 140 million. 15 million American men came home from World War II with deep scars, insignificant skills. They bore the invisible wounds of war. There was weapons everywhere. I'll talk about mental challenge. My father was one of those men who was a Navy pilot in World War II. He came back from the war and built his family. I'm the 7th of his 8 children. I was born in 1961. We had guns everywhere. There was virtually no regulation. Any child in the 50s could buy a weapon from any seller if daddy sent them with the money. We didn't have mass shootings. It wasn't until 1968 in America that serial numbers were even required on weapons sold in this country. You order weapons through the Sears catalog by the mail. In the 70s, I attended a high school, large rural school. Virtually every vehicle in the parking lot was a pickup truck, and almost every one had a rifle or a shotgun on the back glass and a pistol under the seat. We didn't have school shootings. 1979, I began college. One of the jobs I had to work my way through college was as a carpenter. We restored historical buildings. We had to determine in the process of that work what was the original cuts of these homes, residential homes built 75, 85, 100 years ago. You could tell by the saw cut if it was a mechanical cut, an electric cut, or a hand cut. By such observations, we knew exactly how that house was originally built. And to my amazement as a young man, beginning college in Louisiana, working, to my amazement, you know what I discovered, Madam Chair? You know what these houses did not have? That were built 100 years ago in cities in America. You know what they did not have, Commissioner? Locks. Locks. Now I ask you all, what happened to that country, man? A country where homes were built in cities with no locks. A country where guns were everywhere and virtually not regulated at all. Where millions of Americans, 14 million Americans came back. It's 11% of the population at the time after World War II with incredible skills of war and weapons of war, as you called them, everywhere. But we didn't have mass shootings. And here we sit today where an entire once proud Democratic Party is presenting unbelievably unconstitutional laws to press upon our nation. And we have a police commissioner that says he would go home to home and confiscate legally owned weapons if he got a tip. Madam Chair, I yield my speech, but I will not yield my opposition to these unconstitutional.
What made Higgins' response powerful wasn't volume, it was reframing. AOC's argument centers on access. Firearms purchased in states with lighter restrictions are trafficked into cities with stricter laws, undermining local regulations. But Higgins pivoted to what that logic quietly concedes: criminals bypass laws. Even in cities with some of the strictest gun policies in the country, illegal weapons still circulate. So Higgins zoomed out. He went historical. After World War II, millions of combat-trained veterans returned home. Firearms were common. Federal gun regulation was minimal compared to today. Serial numbers weren't required until 1968, and firearms could be purchased through mail-order catalogs. In the 1970s, it wasn't unusual to see rifles in pickup trucks in rural communities. Yet, Higgins argued, the pattern of mass shootings we see today wasn't present at the same scale. He shared an anecdote about restoring century-old homes and noticing something striking. Many didn't even have door locks. A country with widespread firearm ownership, but a very different cultural landscape. His question wasn't about denying violence. It was about causation. If guns existed decades ago without today's frequency of high-profile mass attacks, what shifted? Higgins pointed to factors conservatives often raise: family breakdown, erosion of community institutions, declining trust, media influence, and broader cultural fragmentation. That's where the debate sharpens. AOC emphasizes regulatory gaps between states. Higgins emphasizes moral and social breakdown. One side argues that stronger federal standards reduce harm. The other argues that laws alone can't repair deeper societal fractures. Then comes the constitutional line. Higgins made clear that proposals involving confiscation of legally owned firearms or aggressive federal enforcement cross what he views as a bright boundary. The Second Amendment, in his framing, isn't symbolic, it's structural. There's also an irony embedded in the iron pipeline argument, according to conservatives. If criminals are already ignoring existing laws, expanding restrictions may primarily burden lawful gun owners rather than deter offenders. That's a core philosophical divide. Does policy focus on restricting access broadly, or targeting criminal misuse specifically? Higgins' broader point wasn't that violence isn't real. It was that policy solutions must address both enforcement and culture. Passing legislation, he suggested, is easier than rebuilding civic norms. The underlying question he raised goes beyond firearms. Has something deeper shifted in American society since the mid-20th century? And if so, can legislation alone fix it? That's the real clash. Not just red states versus blue states. Not just regulation versus deregulation. but whether America's challenges are primarily legal or cultural. And until that question is honestly confronted, the argument will keep circling the same ground.